Hello. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to sit down now. Don't know why I'm standing. Good afternoon. I'm Madhav Chinappa, and thank you very much for coming to this workshop on the Digital News Initiative. I'm thankfully joined by very smart colleagues who are going to talk mostly about what we've been doing specifically in DNI. But before I hand over to some of them who will sort of introduce themselves as they go, I just wanted to explain a little bit for context what DNI is, what we're trying to achieve, and why we're doing it. Very simply, overall, DNI is our framework for engagement with the news ecosystem in Europe. And it came about through some conversations that we had with news publishers where, to be frank, they were saying to us that Google was a little bit difficult to deal with and a little difficult to understand. And a lot of that, I think, came from the sort of technology product-based approach that we had taken rather than the kind of industry-based approach. And so that led to a degree of misunderstanding. But some of the publishers said to us, listen, we'd love to do more with you and collaborate on certain specific areas. So we built DNI in collaboration with news organizations that we're talking to. We started in April of last year. With 11 news organizations. We now have about 160 involved. To be honest with you, we've had 1,500 expressions of interest. I've sort of lost count in terms of how many people are involved because there's so much to it. But we're very excited about what it's doing, what we're trying to achieve. We realize we're very much at the beginning of this, but we built DNI under what we call three pillars to it, and this was all based on feedback from the publishers and the ecosystem. The first pillar is around product development, and we'll have my colleagues talk specifically about what we're doing there. But what we did in product development was really to have a dialogue where the news publishers would talk to us about the challenges that we're facing, and then we were able to see whether we can collaborate and come up with things that are positive for the news ecosystem. And we've got 2 examples of that'll be discussed in detail. The second pillar was around training and research. And again, based on feedback, publishers were saying to us, there's lots of really interesting Google tools that are good for journalists, but they're a bit all over the place. Can we do more? And that's why we created a team called News Lab who brought this all together, who go and train journalists, and my colleagues Isa and Matt will be talking about that. And we also help fund some of the research that the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at the University of Oxford do. They have a digital news report. The 2016 is coming out in the middle of June. We'll touch on that very, very briefly, but if you've got any questions, there's two people from the Institute right in the front row who will happily take any questions. And the final area the publishers talked to us about was about innovation. And they said that lots of people talk about innovation, but innovation can be hard. And so we created an innovation fund to try and see if we can stimulate innovation in the European digital news space. And my colleague Ludo will talk more about that. We'd like to make this kind of free-flowing. We do have slides and the presentation discussions. What we thought we'd do is we'll have a Q&A right at the end. But if there's any burning questions as it goes along, please put your hand up and we'll try and get to them. But we'll definitely make time for full Q&A right at the end to have that discussion. Okay, if that makes sense to everybody, I think we'll kick off and we'll start talking about product development. And I'll hand over to my colleague Luca Forlin.
Who is going to sort out the cable first. So I have the challenge to talk about accelerated mobile pages in 15 minutes, which is great because accelerated mobile pages lead to accelerated explanation. So as part, my name is Luca. I work in partnerships. So I work with publishers to help them use and come on board with Google platforms for distribution of content on mobile. So as part of the product development area that is part of that sits under DNI, probably the first topic that emerged in the dialogue with publishers was help us figure out mobile, right? I think that you're familiar with the fact that most publishing companies today see the vast majority of their traffic coming through mobile devices. And mobile devices today is much more smartphones than it is tablets. So it's an entirely new environment. It's an entirely new context where news are consumed. And there's a lot of issues that, that are associated to that. There's business models that are evolving. There is a consumption experience that is evolving. There is the topic of distribution on mobile that is evolving a lot. You are all familiar with what's happening on Facebook, on Apple, with closed formats, proprietary formats that are being required in order to reach these platforms. All these topics were part of the conversation. So the ask from the publishers was help us figure it out and help us try to find a solution that makes it easy for all of us to understand what should be done and how we can reach the broadest possible audience with the right format in an easy and open way. The answer to that is the Accelerated Mobile Pages Initiative. The acronym is key, right? The first point is the acceleration. So the first thing, the first element of fruition of content on smartphones is speed. We have data, or there's data in the industry that 40% of people actually abandon the navigation if a page takes more than 3 seconds to load. So speed is paramount. There's additional data that shows that conversion rates on, for example, e-commerce sites drop by 30% for every single second of wait that you add to the upload of the page. So speed is really paramount and is a fantastic enabler for everything that comes afterwards. Whatever business model is made better, is improved, is made easier by speed. So acceleration and speed were really at the heart of what we're trying to do here. The fact that the traffic comes through smartphones and mobile devices is evident for everybody, is evident for Google as well. So we have the majority of our searches that comes through smartphones. So that was the beginning. That was still the dialogue and trying to understand the issues. And then came the action. So how do you accelerate pages in order to make them faster? And it took quite a bit of time. It was an open exchange where some of the very bright mind, which are not represented here today, some of the bright mind on our side and some of the bright mind on the publisher side came together and said, okay, how do we do this? And it boiled down to, I think, 2 things. One, it was simplification of the code, simplification of the page, and putting together the tools that contributed to the acceleration of that page. With regards to the simplification, I will not go into too much detail, otherwise 15 minutes will of course not be enough. But pages today, or the pages that are used for desktop, are loaded with code. That code is JavaScript. They're loaded with code. First step is simplify that code and put less code into the page. Have something that is much more simple. And so we have developed a common JavaScript library that everybody can use. The second thing is optimize the composition and then the delivery of the page in order to minimize the bandwidth and really make it super fast to be delivered. Once we have that, a simpler page that can be delivered in a much faster way, then you add to it a caching mechanism that brings the page closer to the user, and you have the perfect setup to really make sure that the pages load super, super fast. This is a kind of a visual way to represent that. On the left, I think it's your left, yeah. On the left, you see a normal page with a lot of code and a lot of JavaScript. On the right, you see a new version of that page that is amped. So it's an accelerated mobile page where one single line of JavaScript replaces the whole wealth of code that existed before. So that's what they are: simplified and accelerated. Currently, there is a lot of publishers who have already created AMP pages. The way they work is that a publisher would normally have 2 versions of the page. One that is, I want to call it heavy or heavier, that can be delivered to desktop. The other one that is much faster and leaner, that can be used in order to be delivered on mobile devices. It's an open source initiative, so it's again, it lives within that dialogue of between Google and publishers, but not only Google. There is several other platforms that have embraced AMP and are embracing AMP. If you were at the Twitter speech, I think it was yesterday or the day before, they said we really fully embrace AMP because it's a way to make the fruition experience much, much better for the user. So not only Google, but Twitter, Pinterest is on board, WordPress is on board. There's a lot of parties that are involved in this initiative. On the Google side, in the middle of February, I think it was the 18th. Oh, perfect. Well, the second half of February, we introduced support for AMP pages in search. So today, if you open a browser on a mobile device and you search for something that is related to news, so if you're Italian, search for Matteo Renzi, for example, or Panama Papers will work anywhere. So look for Panama Papers.
Trump will work anywhere too.
Well, we'll not mention that example. You will see a carousel show up with nice images and the headline. If you tap in one of those images, you will see the power of AMP pages really become evident because the pages load instantaneously. Now, that's just the beginning. We will fully embrace AMP on our mobile canvases and mobile properties, so you can expect to see more of AMP pretty much everywhere, not just in that carousel, but in the organic research in the organic result page on Google News and all the other properties that you see up there. How am I doing on the 15 minutes?
You're doing great.
This is kind of the substance of it. And I invite you to try it, by the way, because it's really extraordinary. Sorry, one thing that I have forgotten, I have mentioned very, very quickly, if you can, let's skip directly to this page. So we've worked very closely with a lot of publishers. Being an open source initiative, we've tried to stimulate the ecosystem and make sure that a lot of parties and a lot of people were involved. The invitation for every publisher is go and try it out. The invitation for every third party, so analytics companies, ad serving companies, if you work for a technology provider, the invitation is for you, go and try it out. An open source initiative means that the code is open and lives within a community that can enrich it and can expand it. So today, that's exactly what is happening. We have one hub, one platform where the code is accessible and where it can be enriched, and that's GitHub. We have resources available, you see them listed up there, for everybody to understand how to go about implementing, creating AMP pages. So the invitation, probably the starting point that is worth mentioning is the ampproject.org. So go on that website and you'll find the resources that you need to know all about it and contribute to it. Here's an initial set of publishers. You see big names up there. In reality, we're well past the initial set of partners that went live. There's a lot of wealth on kind of the platform side for distribution, an incredible range of publishers who have embraced them. So this is just the beginning, and it will become bigger and bigger as time goes by. Thanks.
Wow, you did absolutely fine on time, which means I lost my bet. Thank you very much. I'll try the slides for you if that's all right. So just kind of nudge me or something.
I will. Cool, thanks. Hi, I'm George. I'm a product manager at Jigsaw, which is a technology incubator that's a part of the Google family. And we work a lot with users in vulnerable situations. And one of the things that I've noticed over the last couple of days of being here at the festival is there's been a lot of talk about security for journalists and for protecting sources, kind of how you protect your own information, how you secure your devices. But one of the things that hasn't come up particularly much is how we protect the sites that actually serve the news out to the world. And that's something that we've been looking at and have started working on a product called Project Shield that I'd love to talk to you about. So in the past, kind of pre-digital era, if you wanted to stop the news from being published, in a lot of cases you had to take physical action, go out and stop the presses in some way. This still does happen. This is a photo from a couple of years ago, 2012. The Times of India was attacked. A number of activists broke in, tried to smash all of the equipment to shut the news down. But now in the digital world, as we are publishing information on a lot of different sites, in a lot of different places, there's a new form of attack that has come to mind. If you can go to the next slide. It's called a DDoS attack. And before I go any further, and I will say I'm a technical guy, but I'm going to try to keep this at the right level, and I'm happy to go into technical details. How many people in the room have heard of a DDoS attack? And of those of you who have heard of it, how many think you know what a DDoS attack is? Cool. So for the rest of you, and you guys can correct me if I get any of this wrong, DDoS stands for a distributed denial of service attack. And the basic idea of a DDoS attack is that someone who wants to stop someone from accessing a website overloads the web servers for that site. They send it so much traffic that it can't handle it and no one else can get to it. And one of the things that we've seen over the last several years is that the incidence and frequency of DDoS attacks happening has been growing and growing. And part of the reason for that is that they're getting cheaper and cheaper to do. To actually go out and do a DDoS attack yourself, in a lot of cases, takes a little bit more technical information or technical knowledge than some of us might have. But you can go out on the web and you can buy them. And the price has gotten cheaper and cheaper over the years to the point where it's less than 50 euros to buy a simple attack. I've seen some reports that it's actually down to around 5 to 10 euros. I haven't gone out and tested that. That would be illegal, so I don't do that. But the incidence is going up, and when people are attacking the news in particular, it's very hard to tell why they're doing it. And it can be anything from an event that's happened in the world and someone wants to just go out and stop the reporting that's happening about that event. It can be an article that they don't like. And we've seen attacks on news publishers that have published an article about a political speech. Someone who doesn't agree with the politician goes out and tries to stop that from being published. All the way down to someone disagrees with something in a comment thread under an article and they launch a DDoS attack to try to stop that from being seen or read, and as a result they take down the entire site. And I mean, some of you may have seen a few weeks ago in Sweden, I think it was either 3 or 4 weeks ago today, 7 of the largest papers in Sweden were taken down for a portion of the day, all by a DDoS attack. And so this is something that we're seeing happening more and more. One of the ways that we try to describe it, and this is actually, if you can go to the next one, thanks to one of my less technical colleagues, trying to explain what a DDoS attack really is imagine that you wanted to have a birthday party for your kid, and you sent out invitations to 10 of his or her friends and said they were going to come. But somebody who didn't like you decided that they wanted to get in the way of people attending that particular event, and so they told 10,000 of their friends to go and flood the streets around your house. The streets become jammed up, no one can actually get to the house, and you're left there with this great cake or with this great article that you want to get in front of someone, and no one is able to actually access it. And that's what a DDoS attack really is. We started tracking these a few years ago with something called the Digital Attack Map. And this gathers data. We have a partnership with Arbor Networks where the data comes from. Gathers data on attacks that are happening in different places around the world. You can go, the URL is up there, you can go and check it out. There's a lot of great tools to kind of drill in and see what different types of attacks are happening. One of the things that we've seen that's very interesting is that the attacks aren't only on the news, or they're not only on e-commerce sites, but they're on just about any kind of website that you can get. And in fact, with Project Shield, one of the, as we take invitations or we take applications for people who want to be in Project Shield, one of the things that we see is a lot of gaming sites coming and applying for it. And Project Shield, which I'll talk about in a second, is really only for news organizations. But one of the hypotheses we have is that as gamers are out there using Minecraft servers to play their games, they will DOS each other's servers. So I am playing Minecraft. I want to stop anybody else from getting onto the server while I build out my cool Minecrafty thing. And in doing that, I'm developing the skills to actually know how to do DOS attacks. And then I find out, you know, when I turn 14 or something, oh, somebody will pay me to do this? That's great. And so there's kind of this new crop of kids who are out there who are learning these skills as they're going out and gaming, and I think we're going to continue to see more and more DOS attacks happening. This is actually a map of the kind of from the digital attack map 2 days after the Charlie Hebdo attacks in Paris. And that day saw an unprecedented amount of attack traffic coming into France. And we see this kind of over and over again as different attacks or different events happen out in the real world, that more and more attacks happen. They come after news sites, they come after anyone who's trying to publish information about what is actually happening in the world around them. And part of the thing that we saw as this started to happen is that this is exactly the time when your readers and everyone around the world needs the news the most. It's when things are actually happening. That's when the attacks start to happen. And we thought, are there some things that we can actually do to try to help keep the news up when it is under an attack like this? And so we created, there we go. No worries, I have long arms. We created Project Shield. And one of the things that we observed when we created the digital attack map and started thinking about this is that as Google, we see a lot of attacks, as you might imagine, and we've developed a fairly extensive and very, very sound set of defenses against them. And so we thought, what if we could do what we do for ourselves for news organizations and for others who need defense? And so we started an experiment about 3 years ago providing these kind of defenses called Project Shield to a number of news organizations. And we saw that the need was out there, particularly among small, medium-sized publishers who may not have the technical resources or the financial resources to go out and get commercial protection themselves. We saw us defending newspapers in the Ukraine during Euromaidan. And one of the things that was interesting is that we defended papers on all sides of the political debate. Everyone was attacking each other in that case. And from where we sat, we thought, well, we think that everybody's voice should be able to get out. We think that journalism should be something that is sustainable and is not subject to being taken down by this kind of a DDoS attack. And through learning through those few experiments, we found that, yes, there's a need for this. Yes, this is something that we can do quite well. And so we built Project Shield, which is a full-blown product for news organizations to use to protect against DDoS defenses. It essentially, if you go back to that metaphor of the birthday party, acts as a bouncer or a set of traffic checkpoints, making sure that the people or the traffic that is coming to the website is legitimate and is not actually a traffic or is not actually an attack and keeps the attackers out. So we saw plenty of need for that. We built the product. I'll go a little bit technical here. It's something called a reverse proxy. What this means, very, very simply, is that when a website is being protected by Project Shield, if I as a user try to go to that website, that traffic comes first to Project Shield. We filter it and evaluate it using a number of different tools to try to determine whether or not it's an attack or whether or not it's a legitimate request. If it's a legitimate request, we pass it through to the original server of the news organization where the content still gets hosted. If it's an attack, we drop it on the floor and don't pass it through. We also do caching as a part of this, partly to improve performance, but largely as part of our DDoS defense. Essentially, we have enough capacity that if someone is trying to flood a server that maybe could only take 5,000 or 10,000 users at one time, and they try to flood that server with 1 million simultaneous requests. By caching the content, we can absorb all those requests. We can, in fact, just reply to them and say, here's the content, without going down, where a lot of, again, particularly smaller and medium-sized publishers are not able to do that. And so we've been doing this for a few years. In late February, Sundar Pichai, who's our Google CEO, announced in Paris that we are making Project Shield available for free to all of the world's news organizations. So anyone can come and apply. We vet to make sure that it is, in fact, a news organization or a journalist. And one of the things that we've seen through this is that we've been able to find a number of both large and small journalists or news organizations who didn't have defenses before, and in a lot of cases were worried about these kind of attacks. And I think about one person, in fact, there's an independent journalist in sub-Saharan Africa who we've worked with, who we're now protecting through Project Shield, who came to us after he started using Shield and said, I have all this information about the presidential family in my country that I've been worried about publishing because I've been subject to attack over and over again. Now that I have Shield, I feel comfortable publishing this and actually getting the information out about it. And that tells us that we think we're doing a useful thing here. We're very happy that he's able to stay up, and we're inviting others to come and participate as well. More information is available at g.co/shield, and of course we can take questions on this as well.
Yeah, actually, as we're doing so well on time, we could probably take a few questions about AMP or Shield right now, just to keep everybody in the room awake, as I know it's the afternoon and it's warming up, and it's a perfect nap time. So if there are any questions about AMP or Shield now, we're happy to take them now. We can also take them at the end as well. Anybody have a burning question? Yes, we have a burning question right there. Excellent.
Yes, thank you. Georg, my name from the German startup Fair Better Media. A question about Project Shield. Do you gather any kind of forensic insights from all the data you analyze about sources of these DDoS attacks that might actually lead to some predictive analysis that you can, ahead of an event, already estimate that something might come down and kind of upping your defenses for that?
So forensics and attribution of DDoS attacks, it turns out, is really, really hard. So a couple of things I can say about that. One is that because Project Shield is using all of Google's defenses for defending against DDoS attacks, in most cases the things that we see for Shield and the attacks against Shield users are relatively small in the grand scheme of things. And in fact, in a lot of cases, they don't even trip the alerts kind of for the Google-wide defenses. So we don't always see the attack, we just kind of automatically defend against it. We do see some information about some patterns, so you can start to see, here's a series of IP addresses that look like they constitute a botnet. And so we can go, all right, let's stop accepting traffic from that botnet for 15 minutes or 20 minutes or something like that, see whether or not that helps. But the attribution, kind of going to the next step of trying to figure out who's actually behind the attack, is extraordinarily difficult. The attackers tend to hide behind kind of multiple levels of IP spoofing, and in fact, you know, you can sometimes figure out, for example, where is an attacker coming from? Where was this launched from? Somebody in, let's say, Crimea launched an attack, but it looks like the attack is coming from servers in the US because they went and spun up anonymously or using some fake credentials an AWS server and launched it from that. And even the person who was behind them, who maybe hired that person, is still hidden. So it's something that we work on. We talk to others, you know, in the industry and certainly internally about it, but it is a particularly hard problem.
Thanks. I think we have some more questions. There you go. If you got the mic, speak.
Oh, okay, thanks. Hi, my name is David Lamayan from Code for Africa and African Investigation Network. And my question is actually to you about Project Shield. What's the difference between Project Shield and Project Galileo by Cloudflare? Particularly for the for the African continent, there's at least a server for Cloudflare in Mombasa and in Johannesburg or Cape Town. Does Google offer such services, or what? What's the difference?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and the question is, what's the difference between Shield and Project Galileo, Cloudflare? And I won't purport to speak for Cloudflare. I know of Galileo. I don't know all the details of how it works. From my perspective, the more options that are out there for news organizations and for everybody else to take advantage of, the better. And so what I encourage people to do is actually to go out and test the different services and see what's out there. Project Shield, I will say, is a full-time service, and it is kind of free all the time. I'm not sure whether or not that's the case with Galileo or not. I think it's kind of there as a backup defense. That said, we're thrilled that Cloudflare is doing Galileo as well. We think, again, that the more people that are out there, essentially the better. I don't know, and I don't know that anybody's got any data around whose defenses are better. You know, I mean, that's a fairly sensitive topic and something that's hard to get into. But again, they're, you know, I would imagine roughly equivalent, and I would just encourage people to test them both out. And you know, frankly, there are a number of other services that are out there as well. There's Deflect, which is out of Canada. There are other commercial services that people can get in place as well.
Roberto Bernabò, local newspaper of Gruppo Espresso. I want to know why sometimes during research we don't see the carousel, and if you can know how the algorithm choose the news to show in the carousel.
Sure. So this is a question on accelerated mobile pages. If you've tried it in the meantime, you will see that from some queries, the carousel does show, and in some cases it doesn't show. There is two factors today contributing to that. The first one is we have to identify the query as strictly related to news. So Panama Papers, for example, would definitely trigger an algorithm. A carousel. I have tested it myself. It is true that Matteo Renzi, for example, could be a generic enough query with a lot of search results, such as Wikipedia page or images, that could not trigger the carousel. In reality, I've tested that one, and it kind of does. But there are queries that are sort of in between. So the first parameter is we have to understand that the query is related to current news. That's first element. The second element is that in order to have a carousel, we need to have a breadth of content that justifies the carousel. So not just one page, for example. There has to be multiple pages available in AMP format in order to create that carousel so that we can display it. So in this moment, you may see it with possibly a low frequency, because we have to have these two factors combined in order to show it. Over time, you'll see that frequency increase. Not on the first element, because news is news, but on the availability of AMP pages, you'll see it more and more. So that's that. With regards to understanding what a news query is in this moment, it's no different from what it was 3 months ago or 4 months ago, where we actually were doing the same thing. So rather than showing the AMP carousel, we were showing something else. But there hasn't been any change on the index or the algorithm as consequence of AMP.
Thank you. Any more questions about AMP or Shield? Oh, yes, fantastic.
Okay, same question. Is there a threshold, I mean, a minimum of 4 publisher or 5 publisher about that current affair news and the carousel shows?
It depends if the question is about a kind of a guideline or not. In reality, our algorithm are quite complicated, are quite complex, and they take a variety of different signals into account in order to display certain results. So I wouldn't be able to answer that specific question for you. I have seen carousels with 4 pages, 5 pages. I've definitely seen carousels for 10 pages. 1 is definitely not enough. 10 is a lot, so we like that. So the mechanic likes that. There is an A point that is kind of the triggering mechanism.
Thanks. I think there was a question.
There was another one, I think, right behind.
And I think we might need to call out the last question on this section unless someone has a really, really urgent one, but we'll have time at the end.
My name is Antonio Schiavone. I'm a computer scientist and a researcher of the Italian National Council of Researchers. I'd like to have a little more technical information by Project Shield. In particular, it basically works as a CDN network, and there are any latency in updating the website, so the news feed using Project Shield.
Yeah, so and I'm happy to talk to you afterwards about like deep technical detail if you want to, so that we don't actually put the rest of the people to sleep. So you're right. Project Shield looks and feels a lot like a CDN. We're not building it with the intention of being kind of a full-blown CDN. So latency and performance tends to vary depending a lot on what the origin server looks like. And what that means is that depending on where the end user is and where the server that's actually hosting the content is, in some cases going through Shield is actually faster because we have a faster connection to the end user. But in some cases it can be a little bit slower and we add a little bit of latency. We serve and proxy the content and cache the content out of multiple data centers in North America and Europe and Asia. And so for the most part we've had very, very few complaints about latency. In a couple of places people have seen tens of milliseconds of additional latency to be put in there, but it doesn't seem to be terribly bad, and that's something we continue to work on improving.
Excellent. Thank you very much. There aren't any more other burning questions. Don't worry, we have time at the end. I'm going to hand over to my colleagues from NewsLab to talk about training and research, and they're going to look over to me to drive the slides.
Yeah, this is going to be a bit awkward. I'm doing that.
Yeah, sorry about that. As you can tell, this is a really well-crafted presentation put together.
Yeah, totally. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Cook from the Google News Lab. I'm the UK, Ireland, and Nordics lead. This is Isa Sonnenfeld, who's the lead for Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. It's great to be back. I was here last year, and I had to do a 1-hour workshop on search with no Wi-Fi. So that was an interesting challenge. Let's hope today it goes better, Okay, let's move on to the next slide. And again, there we go. So what is the News Lab? Well, put simply, it's a team of people who work at Google, who work to help train and support newsrooms going through change, and newsrooms thinking about how to provide extra skills to their workforce. We think about ourselves, we're a small team still, but we think about ourselves in 3 ways. Tools, which essentially means what can Google do to be a better partner, as Manav said, to provide more online training facilities, and also, crucially, when invited, in newsroom training as well. Data, and that's something we're going to look at in a moment. When you look at something like Google Trends, and as journalists use that data responsibly, how can that be used to shape and inform your research and your storytelling? We're doing lots with newsrooms already in Europe about that. And then programs. What are some of the other issues that newsrooms are grappling with? Social media verification is one. What about dealing with finding content from a range of different online sources? Some of the different issues that are being dealt with we'll cover there. And moving on to the next slide. When I was here last year, I was kind of on my own. Luckily now I've been joined by some friends and trusted colleagues. Isa, myself and David are the leads for the UK, Germany and France there. Also here in Italy we have an excellent dedicated media training specialist at the front, Elisabetta, who walking around Perugia it appears knows everyone, so thank you. Also we have people in Poland and Central and Eastern Europe and in Spain and Portugal. So a real commitment from us that there's a team of people that are working with journalists and newsrooms. The key part of that really though does start when it comes to training and tools.
Okay, good afternoon also from me. My name is Lisa, as Matt said. I'm leading the News Lab for Switzerland, Austria and of course Germany. So the News Lab, we think about the News Lab as the first access point for journalists and media entrepreneurs in order to use products and learn how to use our Google tools that are relevant for journalists or for storytelling. And as Matt mentioned, we think about the News Lab first as the first access point, but also as a team to really collaborate with journalists. So next slide. So we created the Google News Lab site, and you find it on g.co/newslab, where we build out a series of online tutorials focusing on 4 areas. So research, reporting, optimization of the content, and of course distribution. And if you check out the Google News Lab site, you will see dedicated online tutorials for each of the products where we think that they can be relevant to journalists. Yeah, next one. So what we do when we go into newsrooms, we of course showcase the tools that can be relevant for digital storytelling, from maps to Google Earth to trends, and we're going to talk about trends in a bit. So we want to make sure that journalists have one access point when they think about reporting and research. Next one. I have to look at you, right? Not at Matt. It's kind of confusing. So yes, we spend a lot of time in newsrooms in order to train journalists, in order to also understand what kind of tools they're already using and how we can leverage the tools and make them better for journalists. We started to train newsrooms and journalists globally, and since February last year, when Matt was still by himself, we trained over 10,000 journalists in Europe. And of course, with the support of our training specialists, Elisabetta, Milan, and Beate, and a growing team, we're looking forward to even visit more newsrooms, not only in the UK, France, and the respective countries that Matt already mentioned. And of course, our goal is to train as many journalists as possible and to give access to the tools in the best possible way. And we do that with some of the most inspiring and best journalism organization and training organizations. So we work really closely with the EJC, for example, to host news impact summits, where we bring together journalists, developers, and entrepreneurs to think really about what is digital storytelling and what are the tools that digital storytelling can make better and more efficient. And of course, we want to leverage our tools, our tutorials to also local newsrooms. A couple of weeks ago, we launched a partnership with a German partner called the Netzwerk Medientrainer to also visit local newsrooms and host trainings on our respective tools. I'm gonna hand over to Matt now to talk about trends and data.
So one of the good things about going and speaking to journalists is journalists are never shy to give feedback. And so we get feedback all the time on how the products and the tools that journalists use to tell their stories could be altered, could be changed, and often the best thing about the job is that you get lots and lots of examples and case studies where stories that have been told in various ways before can be told in a completely new way. One of the tools that we offer that does that, and there'll be other providers that offer others as well, is Google Trends. Put simply, it's a website that's been available since 2007, and with journalism feedback taken on board, last year in June it relaunched. Data journalism, I don't have to tell you, is nothing new. We're not pretending it is, but obviously technology has changed and there's many more data sets available. Let's take a look at the next slide, and you see that this is Google data alone, 3 billion searches a day, 1 trillion a year. However, this graph behind me, I think, dates back to the 1800s or 1900s or so. What has changed, though, is the ability for journalists to use tools like Google Trends to try and think about stories in a new way. One of the big issues that journalists will be facing this year, one of the biggest issues in Europe, obviously politically, is the EU referendum coming in June. Let's go on to the next slide. This shows you currently, something you can find on the left on the search tool, search interest in the UK for the issue of the EU referendum. Compare and contrast, maybe it's interesting to note the differences there. I think, though, what's really interesting, particularly for journalists who are thinking about how to cover this story, what are the top 10 questions that people in the UK are searching for when it comes to this issue? Question 1, what does the word Brexit mean? And already, if you look at the copy, the headlines, the tweets, already this term, Brexit, which refers to British exit, is something that those who read newspapers every day, or those who write newspapers, or politicians, they're using this word already. It's a shortcut. But here, it's the #1 question in the UK. What does that mean? We saw similar things during the UK election last year. Already, let's go on to the next slide. We can see publishers around Europe and elsewhere using trends and other data sets to start to think about stories in a different way. This is Politiken in Denmark. This is the BBC in the UK thinking about the global issue. Next slide is the Mail Online. A story, there we go, the budget, something they have to cover every year. What about one year doing it a bit differently with a map or with data? In this case, they're showing search interest for the different issues across that country. I won't pretend to pronounce the Polish brand there, and I won't pretend that I get football either. I'm not great at either. But this is a fascinating story, I'm told, about Polish football. Moving on to the next one. One of the real changes to this trends tool is feedback from you saying it would be great if the data was real time. This shows you the data is now real time. This is showing you, in fact, the democratic debate in November. You look at the issues that are being talked about in that debate on TV. Then people in the US are going onto their mobile or their laptop to look for more information about what they're hearing. This visualizes that and gives you an idea, maybe as a content creator, what are the issues that people want more information on. Let's go on to the next one. You can see here a map of the US. This is presidential Republican candidates search interest, not search sentiment. Red is Donald Trump. Interesting, though, for me, yeah, there's a lot of interest in Donald Trump. Look up towards the lakes, though, and you can see the blob of orange. This is where these trends tools absolutely require your own analysis and journalism on top of it to pick out the other stories. In this case, what is going on by the lakes? Why is there a candidate there that is apparently bucking the trends? Let's move on to the next, where you can see all of the trends we work with newsrooms on, and all the trends that are made available, either on social media at twitter.com/Google Trends. Also, for those of you who are interested in data journalism and want to look at some of the things we've shown you already, or want to see what is out there, then there's a Google Trends Data Store GitHub site. So that's just one example where we're working with newsrooms. There are many other ways, and Issa's going to walk through some of the programs.
Yeah, so next slide. As Matt mentioned in the beginning, our work is focused on 3 areas. So trainings and tools, data, trends, and programs. And we build our programs in order to also establish an ecosystem and help organizations, media organizations, to first work with us, but also tackle some of the challenges that are apparent in the media landscape. And one focus area of the programs is citizen reporting. And we're partnering with three organizations here. So Storyful, of course, we launched YouTube Newswire with the aim to verify YouTube or user-generated content videos that are published on YouTube. The second partnership is the First Draft Coalition, where we tackle and we support the challenge in the media landscape to tackle or to think about verification of social media content. We all know that everyone has a mobile phone in her hand, in her or his hand, and we can be reporters ourselves. So how do you, as a journalist, verify the content that is being published on Twitter or other platforms? And the First Draft Coalition is dealing with exactly that question. Our third partnership with the Witness Media Lab thinks more about human rights issues. So these partnerships are at the core of our work when we think about programs, and we want to help them have more impact and really develop their work even broadly. Next slide. The other area is, or the other thinking behind programs is that we think bringing journalists and developers together really triggers innovation and really triggers innovation for journalism, but also for storytelling. So that's why we are partnering with Hex Hackers to organize Hex Hackers Connect events around the world. We've just been in London a couple of months ago, in New York, in San Francisco. And what Hex Hackers Connect is basically a boot camp, a brainstorming boot camp for journalists and developers to think about innovation and innovative ideas and products. Next slide. So already talking to media entrepreneurs and developers is something at the core of our team, and we're really excited to work with these companies or organizations. We became the first tech partner of MetaVC, so an accelerator program based in San Francisco to mentor these media startups and these media entrepreneurs, but also support MetaVC to have more impact in the ecosystem, in the media startup ecosystem that is still very new. We also extended this partnership to Next Media Accelerator, a German-based, Hamburg-based accelerator, where we started to roll out media hackathons in collaboration with local publishing companies and media companies to do 2.5-day hackathons where we get together journalists, developers, designers, media entrepreneurs to build prototypes and to really inflate or integrate those ideas into the traditional media process and landscape. Next slide. And the last bit of our program section is the NewsLab Fellowship. Matt has worked with a couple of partners in the UK to launch the NewsLab Fellowship. BBC NewsLab, FT, Telegraph, Full Fact, and the Bureau of Investigative Journalism to provide young data journalists the opportunity to spend a specific period of time in newsrooms to develop their own data journalistic ideas and projects. We're going to roll out this NewsLab Fellowship more broadly in Europe. We're going to start with Germany, France, and of course, we're excited to extend it also to other countries. So we focus on trends and tools and programs, and part of the News Lab initiative and engagement is also research. And Matt is going to finish with the Reuters report.
Cool, thank you. So, as Manna said, we've got the Reuters experts here at the front, so thank you. I guess they'll be the best people to answer questions. But a key plank of the D&I has always been our investment into research and looking at the changing media landscape. So we work with the Reuters Institute on the study of journalism, and we've helped them expand their existing digital news survey and report to cover 26 countries, and 19 of those are here in Europe. So that's a survey that looks at the news habits of more than 50,000 people, with the idea that if the newsroom can understand their audiences and what their audiences are doing, then they get much more of an insight into what is potentially going to appeal to them. The move to distributed content, the extent to which social networks and other aggregators are being used for news, these are some of the issues that are being considered in this report and through this lens. There's also a section on whether and why people prefer algorithms or editors. There's also a big section on trust in the news organisations. So some of the really big key overarching issues are within this. There's also a specific focus group that has given them feedback in the UK, US, Germany and Spain. And the report will be tracking the continuing rise of smartphones, the thing, as Isa said, the phones that everyone now has in their pockets. The report will look at the attitudes toward advertising and give a real consensus and overview of the differences in a place like Europe, where there's many differences from country to different countries. Much more information on the report from the experts at the front. One last thing from us. If you are interested in anything we've covered here today, then the next slide will show you there you go, the contact details. That's how to get hold of us. That's also how to request or consider some of the training we've suggested. We'll come back to you with some feedback, and also the website g.co/newslab. Okay, we'll leave it there, but I'm going to hand over to Ludo now, who's going to talk about the third pillar, which is the Innovation Fund, or take a question.
Should we have a question? Yeah, let's take a question.
Yeah.
Tick, tick. Hello. Hi. Just quickly on that last point around the research into 26 countries. So I work with BBC Media Action, and I know that my colleagues in the media development world are sitting right next to me from RISJ. There's tremendous interest in the media development sector for insights into the kind of use of mobile and uptake and so on, but outside the West. And there was particular interest, for example, in the incorporation of Turkey, which was kind of the closest thing really to some of the patterns of media use that we would see. Sorry, that doesn't mean any disrespect to the Turkish community, but the thing is that, in sub-Saharan Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, there's large proportions of the community that are not on traditional mobile in a Western sense, and there's a real interest in the development community for that kind of insight into mobile use. Is that likely to happen anytime soon?
I'll take it. Yeah, so you could probably just hand the microphone to your right. I think would be the simplest thing, honestly. I mean, we're working with the Reuters Institute to expand out the countries. I don't know, David, do you want to speak more?
I'm David Levy from the Reuters Institute. We're really pleased to be expanding the coverage within Europe to actually 20 countries this year, and then we hope 30 countries in the course of 2017-18. You're right that in the course of that expansion we bring in some countries that may share more similarities with some of the countries you're interested in, but we are constrained with essentially, we're doing this with an online survey, and so the online survey requires us to focus on countries with relatively high levels of internet penetration. And so far, we've been looking at countries with more or less democratic systems. We could have a discussion about that afterwards in the case of some of the countries. But what we want to do more generally is, two other things. One is, within the Digital News Report, we're also looking a little bit beyond Europe, but they're mainly countries like, we're looking at Brazil, the US, Canada, Australia, South Korea this year. And we would like to look at other countries in the developing world in the future, but I think we probably need to do those as self-standing reports or a separate category of reports, because they're really interesting, but they raise some specific issues about how you do surveys in the countries that you're particularly interested in, and the themes that we would discover from there we expect to be different from some of the main themes in the main report. So we want to do it, but we may do it as a supplementary series of reports in time.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? We can also hold them to the end. There's one right at the back. We'll take that. And just on that point, I think that's one of the great questions for a discussion either over coffee or in the bar, and that's the beauty of Perugia in my experience.
Hi, my name's Sarah Reid. I'm a press officer at the University of Leeds. Do you offer training in data visualization for university press officers as well, or is it solely just for journalists?
So we've done a lot, taking Leeds as an example, we've worked with Trinity Mirror Regionals to put on free training events for journalists, students, academics, people who have got a 9-to-5 role and can't take time out for training. So we put on evening classes in places like Leeds, Birmingham and Manchester, doing much more of that, thinking about the different ways and different audiences, because we know that journalists are time poor. So that's kind of approach. So the answer is yes, and if there's specific requests, then come and have a chat. But we've definitely done stuff with universities and academics and to a certain degree PR teams. The core focus is definitely journalists, but it makes sense where the lessons might be similar for us to work with people who want the training too.
Okay, any other questions? All right. Unfortunately, Luca has to leave us because he's got to be on another panel session. So we'll continue onwards now with my friend and colleague Ludovic Blecher, who is the head of the Digital News Initiative Innovation Fund.
Hi. So I'm Ludovic. I'm a news guy, and as you all, I really care about future of journalism, and I'm really happy to introduce the third pillar of DNI, the Innovation Fund. It's really important to understand DNI as a framework. It's all about engaging with the industry, having dialogue, and the fund is also all about having discussion with all the news ecosystem. So what we are talking here, so the fund is first really broad and open. 32 countries in Europe are eligible to apply to the fund, and anyone working in the news ecosystem can apply. It's open to legacy player, broadcaster, new startup, online pure player, and you will see even individual can apply if they have an idea for news. So what is the aim of the DNI fund? It's to support and to stimulate. Stimulate is really the key word. Innovation in the news ecosystem. Over the next 3 years, we're going to make available 150 million euros for ideas that demonstrate new thinking in the practice of digital journalism and to support the development of new business model. It's really important to understand what we are looking for. We want really specific project. We don't want the broad digital agenda of the publishers. It's not about modernization, it's about innovation and transformation. So specific project that has to be digital only, or at least the main component should be digital, and it has to come with clear KPI or a clear business plan. And that's very important to focus on the project. So how are we going to assess the project and what are the criteria of the fund? First, we look at the impact on the news ecosystem. How does it address the creation of new product for new way to consume news? How does it impact the news ecosystem by showing new way to distribute the information? We are looking also, of course, at the use of technology and innovation. And we really struggle hard to try to define innovation and quality journalism. And guess what? We've decided not really to define it and to consider, rather than talking about quality journalism, we prefer talking about original journalism, and we look at innovation more as a process. And what is really important for us is to try to take into account the starting point of each publishers. Not all media landscape in Europe are exactly at the same level, and there is huge difference between publishers, so we look really at the starting point. Last but not least, we are very careful about who is behind, who is the team, and the feasibility of the project. I would say that the key word for your project should be consistency. The project has to be clear, has to come with KPI, a clear perimeter, and to be feasible, or at least show us how do you mitigate the risks. We have 3 tracks or 3 buckets. The first one is as broad and open as possible, and we call it the prototype tracks. It's for project with cutting-edge idea of innovative ideas with assumption that has to be tested. The cost of the project should be up to 50K. We fund maximum 50K, and it's 100% funded. Everyone can apply to the prototype track, even individuals. Second track is for medium projects that are seeking between 50K and 300K funding. So it's a project that is about 450K. We fund up to 70%, maximum 300K funding. And large projects are up to 1 million euro, that is the cap, and it's up to 70% funding. What kind of expenses are taken into account? I would say almost every kind of expenses are eligible. It can be internal, external, engineering cost, design cost, editorial cost. We just cap the marketing cost, and we're not going to take furniture, office rental, or travel expenses. So how does it work in terms of governance? There is 2 layers. First is the project team, and second is the council. The project team I'm leading is a mix of Googlers and non-Googlers, exactly as the project team, as the council, sorry. And we review all projects, and all projects are reviewed by 1 internal Googler and 1 very hands-on external people, specialist of innovation and news. We look at all projects, we assess all projects, we produce recommendation and shortlist large projects for council review, and the council decide and vote, and the project team select the medium project and the prototype project. As you can see, in the council we have very hands-on people, we have CEO level, we have more academic people. Ariana, who is hosting us here, is part of the council. We are very proud. And there is 9 people from the news ecosystem and 3 persons from Google. So we have very in-depth discussion about each project, and it's a collective discussion, and each time we want to have both views from internal and external. Now let me share with you the lessons of round 1. We've opened the first application window in October for 6 weeks, and we get a crazy number of 1,236 applications coming from 30 countries among the 32 eligible countries. If you look at the distribution, about the same number of applications for large and medium, about 250 projects, and 755 prototypes. And guess what? Most of the prototypes came from organization and not from individuals. So that was an interesting learning. And we've got also a lot of projects that were collaborative. You can apply with a specific project for your organization, but we really, really welcome collaborative projects. We had collaboration between publishers from same countries, or between a publisher and a new startup, between a publisher and an academic, and we really welcome collaboration. We wish we'll have more collaborative projects in next round. Diversity was really here. Company applied, somewhere pure player, broadcaster, academic apply, association. So that was very broad, and also very broad in terms of topic. We'll talk about that in a moment. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, outcome of round one. We've selected 128 projects coming from 33 countries for 27 million euro. We offer 27 million euro funding. We are now in the process of discussing with the applicant to define milestones for each project and to follow up the project. You can find on DNI News website the list of the applicant that has been selected. We don't enter into the details of each project for confidentiality reasons. Some of the applicants make public what their projects are, so you can find it, but at least you can find the list on our website, and you should have a look at it because that's very interesting. I really want to value here the process as much as the funding. When I say that the fund is also all about having discussion, I want to say 2 words about our process. We review all applications and we do a first filter, and we shortlist as much as application as possible. The idea of the application is like an in-depth elevator pitch, and we expect people to draw our attention. For the first round, we've shortlisted more than 300 applications for interviews. And then we have interview with applicant, and we try to understand who is behind, what's the idea, and to really engage the conversation. And then there is another filter to make the final decision. So the process, how you work on your application is very important, and the fund really offer the opportunity to step back, to brainstorm with your team, to show up with idea, and to dare taking risk with a new innovative project. I'm running out of time, so very quickly, the trends and learning, a lot of projects about virtual video and especially virtual reality, data journalism, personalization of news. A new trend was audio, a lot of projects about audio, computer journalism, automation of creation of content, and platform. One tip, or a bunch of tips, be more specific, focus on your project, explain the impact, explain who is the team behind, provide clear KPI, describe the cost, and again, we really welcome the collaborative approach. Spend time on our website, read the FAQ, read the application form, take the time to go through all the questions, and after that, please reach out. We are really happy to answer all your questions. There is people behind the fund, dnifund@google.com, and now we are happy to answer your question and even to have a drink after if you want. Grazie mille.
Grazie mille. Thank you very much, Ludo. Oh. Wow, you even got a round of applause. That's what happens when you give 27 million to journalists. Thank you very much. We seem to be doing okay on time. Oh, someone's coming towards me. So we actually do have time for questions. Maybe we've exhausted you already and you're ready for your espresso. This being Italy, it'll be your 3rd espresso or 4th espresso of the day. I think we have a question there.
When you started out on this program, what were your expectations in which areas of technology the applicants would focus their projects? And also, did you have any specific interest that there's a particular area of technology where you wanted to see a particular focus on?
I would say that we don't have specific area. That's all about stimulation. So we want to be surprised. We want to see new trends. We want to see people showing up with new ideas, and we want to be disrupted as well with your ideas. So we are not we have not specific expectation rather than having a clear project and not the broad digital agenda. And something I should make clear here is that we don't want pure content creation. we don't fund pure content creation, and for next round, we are not going to fund projects that are about trainings, but all topics are welcome.
Yeah, just to build on that, I think, honestly, the approach that we took with the fund was as open and unrestricted as possible. And that was absolutely, completely intentional. It also was probably slightly crazy, right? But I think that what we didn't want to do is sort of box anybody in or to set any preconditions or definitions. And I should, underscore the fact that this is all about awards. This is nothing to do with Google. This is about projects external to Google. And so that's why we wanted to do it as open as possible and make sure any of the project that come in, that it's in total control all by the project owners, both from an IP perspective and a confidentiality perspective and everything like that. All we were trying to do is stimulate overall, and that's why we did it in the slightly crazy way that we did.
Yeah. And it has nothing to do with Google products. So no Google technology should be part of the project. That's not the question. It has nothing to do with Google products.
We have a question there and a question there. Thanks.
So which different priorities Newsroom have in different countries across Europe? You listed the main topics regarding the applications. What's the priority of Newsroom in Italy, in Germany, in France, and the country differences?
In terms of topics?
Topics, yeah, relevance.
That's hard at this point to really dig into specific countries regarding the topics. I would say that the 5 trends we've highlighted here are kind of European trends, and even in Italy we had a lot of projects about video and about mobile. So it's more general, that's why it's trending topics, and then we will wait for other rounds to try to share more interesting insights about the industry, because the fund is also about that. At some point, we want to be able to showcase projects and to make the project we are funding beneficial to the whole news ecosystem, and people will explain what they learn from the process, what they learn from their innovation and their failure.
Yeah, and just to build on that, I think, we're learning from this process as well, right?
First one was a prototype.
Yeah, we keep talking about the we're prototyping as we go. And we knew that we would make mistakes. I'm sure we have. We just want to kind of try and improve and make slightly different mistakes in the next few rounds as we go. And I think it was interesting to see, I'm on the council, so my view, I would say, is that there weren't really country ones, but it was interesting to see, for example, just personalization. People talking about personalization or robot journalism in different countries as well, which then goes to a personal view that I have, which is actually collaboration across boundaries can be a very good thing, right? And hopefully we'll see more. We saw some collaborative projects in the first round, and we'd love to see more of them as we go. And there's a question over there.
Hi there. I just would like to know what your definition of innovation is. Is that just technical insights, or could it be business models or workflows or processes or things like this?
Yes. is the short answer.
Next question.
I'm being sorry. I'm being slightly. I'm not actually being facetious. We intentionally didn't define what innovation was, which was part of the crazy elements to it. Because as Ludo was saying, and he may want to say more, but innovation for a publisher in Greece is going to be different from an innovation for a publisher in the UK or in Slovenia, and so we didn't want to define it that way. As a personal point on that, for future rounds, I'd love to see more stuff on the business model, actually, because that's a personal view that I have, that the business model is actually the thing that we need a lot of innovation and experimentation on. But we did see some of that as well, right? So I think it was very positive that way. Sorry, Ludo, I don't know if you want to add to that.
No, I do agree with you. I would just say that innovation is maybe more process, and it really depends of the starting point. So it has to be something new that open a new path or a new way, and then it's all about the process. But the innovation we are looking at should come with specific KPI, with numbers, and with at least you should really highlight the opportunities that are coming with this innovation.
And just as a small anecdote, if there's any other questions, we'll take it. But you know, before the fund was open, we talked about it. Obviously, a colleague of mine went and talked to a publisher in a large country who will remain nameless and said, you know, please start thinking about any projects you have for the innovation fund. And he went back to them after the window opened. He said, you know, have you thought about projects for the fund? He said yes. I said, great. Are you going to apply? They said no. And he said, well, why not? He said, well, because we started thinking about these projects and we hit on 2 of them we think we should be doing anyhow, right? And so that for me was actually success, because it started people thinking about innovation and then actually realizing perhaps it's not as hard as you think. Sometimes you need extra stimulation and help, and that's what the fund is there for. But sometimes just the process of the thinking about it can actually achieve some positive outcomes, irrespective of anything that we do.
A question particularly for Matt and Isa. I mean, you're doing a lot of ground and legwork for Google, visiting all the newsrooms. And I was wondering if over the time that you have been doing this, you've seen a change in perspective of journalists towards Google. I mean, there's been a lot of critical perspective on Google. Axel Springer loves to butt heads with Google over questions of intellectual property and everything, and people are very suspicious. Oh, what is Google really up to? Do they want to buy our good faith? So is that something where you meet less or more criticism, and what helps more to sway the opinion of journalists? Is this training and being open, or just doling out money?
Really good question, and I'm going to answer it because you mentioned some of the German publishers, of course. It definitely opened the doors on the level that we are talking with the newsroom, so on the editorial level. And there is great demand and great interest, especially when it comes to trainings and trends, and better understanding by the journalists how to use the tools. I think it's too early to say if it changes anything in the perception. I think we offer something really special, full range of products, ideas, new ways of storytelling, and especially experimentation. So one anecdote also from this week, actually, I was working closely with Berliner Morgenpost on a brand new VR feature that we launched a couple of days ago called VR View. And VR View gives you, as a publisher, the opportunity to integrate 360 video and photo directly into your text, into your article. So experimentation and offering our resources and our expertise to newsrooms and to editors is definitely something that is really being appreciated. So yeah, the interest is there, and the demand is really great. And we see that based on the numbers of newsrooms and journalists approaching us and asking us for more trainings or for more in-depth trainings on the tools.
Yeah, I could just build on that a bit as well, which is I think that, you know, if you look at where DNI came from, it was based on feedback we had from publishers that they didn't quite understand what Google was doing overall in the news space. And I say this as a news person. You know, I spent 20 years in the news industry. I worked at the BBC and AP, and when I was at the BBC, I used to actually complain to people at Google about Google. And I used to say, you don't really get the news industry, and then whenever you try and do something, it's always with the New York Times, the Washington Post. And I think what DNI has allowed us to do, based on that feedback, is to really kind of frame our discussions in a much more open and collaborative sense. And I think it's made, hopefully, by being as open as we can, people are able to understand us much better. Because I think a lot of the suspicion that you had, that you mentioned, was based on the fact that, you know, Google was a little bit of a black box, and it did some stuff over here, and it was a bit hard to understand what it was doing. And so DNI is very much our expression of saying that, you know, we play a positive role in the ecosystem, we're structuring it in this way, and we're trying to do it based on feedback and be as open and transparent as we can. And I think to answer your very specific question about, you know, what's been the bit that's sort of, been picked up the most, ironically, I think it would be the training and the product stuff has been the stuff that people have really, really engaged with, because they realize that that's the stuff that is there and sustainable. And trust me, the fund is very much appreciated, and people appreciate that. But actually, the open dialogue that we've had around the training and the research that NewsLab does, the open dialogue that we've had around product development has been seen as a real sea change and a shift in terms of the approach that Google has really had with the ecosystem. So I'm hoping that, we're still very early days on D&I, right? But we're hoping that it's a, good positive steps. If you think there's stuff we should be doing differently, come talk to me, right? I will be here afterwards. I will be in the bar tonight, as will the rest of the gang, right? We really need to hear from you, because we're kind of building this together. D&I is an overall ecosystem initiative, and we need to hear from you, because we don't know what we're going to do next, because we want to hear and have a dialogue to do what we do next. Okay. Any other questions? Well, great. On that rousing ending then, I look forward to seeing you guys either over coffee or over a drink in the bar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
But we'll definitely make time for full Q&A right at the end to have that discussion. Okay, if that makes sense to everybody, I think we'll kick off and we'll start talking about product development, and I'll hand over to my colleague Luca Forlin.
Who is going to sort out the cable first. So I have the challenge to talk about accelerated mobile pages in 15 minutes, which is great, because accelerated mobile pages lead to accelerated explanation. So as part, my name is Luca. I work in partnerships. So I work with publishers to help them use and come on board with Google platforms for distribution of content on mobile. So as part of the product development area that is part of that sits under D&I, probably the first topic that emerged in the dialogue with publishers was help us figure out mobile, right? I think that you're familiar with the fact that most publishing companies today see the vast majority of their traffic coming through mobile devices. And mobile devices today is much more smartphones than it is tablets. So it's an entirely new environment. It's an entirely new context where news are consumed. And there's a lot of issues that are associated to that. There's business models that are evolving. There is a consumption experience that is evolving. There is the topic of distribution on mobile that is evolving a lot. You are all familiar with what's happening on Facebook, on Apple, with
product development, and we'll have my colleagues talk specifically about what we're doing there. But what we did in product development was really to have a dialogue where the news publishers would talk to us about the challenges that we're facing, and then we were able to see whether we can collaborate and come up with things that are positive for the news ecosystem. And we've got 2 examples of that'll be discussed in detail. The second pillar was around training and research. And again, based on feedback, publishers were saying to us, there's lots of really interesting Google tools that are good for journalists, but they're a bit all over the place. Can we do more? And that's why we created a team called NewsLab, who brought this all together, who go and train journalists. And my colleagues Isa and Matt will be talking about that. And we also help fund some of the research that the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at the University of Oxford do. They have a digital news report. The 2016 is coming out in the middle of June. We'll touch on that very, very briefly, but if you've got any questions, there's two people from the Institute right in the front row who will happily take any questions. And the final area the publishers talked to us about was about innovation. And they said that lots of people talk about innovation, but innovation can be hard. And so we created an innovation fund to try and see if we can stimulate innovation in the European digital news space. And my colleague Ludo will talk more about that. We'd like to make this kind of free-flowing. We do have slides and the presentation discussions. What we thought we'd do is we'll have a Q&A right at the end. But if there's any burning questions as it goes along, please put your hand up and we'll try and get to them. The workshop on the digital news initiative. I'm thankfully joined by very smart colleagues who are going to talk mostly about what we've been doing specifically in D&I. But before I hand over to some of them who will sort of introduce themselves as they go, I just wanted to explain a little bit for context what D&I is, what we're trying to achieve, and why we're doing it. Very simply, overall, DNI is our framework for engagement with the news ecosystem in Europe. And it came about through some conversations that we had with news publishers where, to be frank, they were saying to us that Google was a little bit difficult to deal with and a little difficult to understand. And a lot of that, I think, came from the sort of technology product-based approach that we had taken rather than the kind of industry-based approach. And so that led to a degree of misunderstanding. But some of the publishers said to us, listen, we'd love to do more with you and collaborate on certain specific areas. So we built DNI in collaboration with news organizations that we're talking to. We started in April of last year with 11 news organizations. We now have about 160 involved. To be honest with you, we've had 1,500 expressions of interest. I've sort of lost count in terms of how many people are involved because there's so much to it. But we're very excited about what it's doing, what we're trying to achieve. We realize we're very much at the beginning of this, but we built DNI under what we call three pillars to it. And this was all based on feedback from the publishers and the ecosystem. The first pillar is around Hello. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to sit down now. Don't know why I'm standing. Good afternoon. I'm Madhav Chinappa, and thank you very much for coming to this.
Closed formats, proprietary formats that are being required in order to reach these platforms. All these topics were part of the conversation. So the ask from the publishers was help us figure it out and help us try to find a solution that makes it easy for all of us to understand what should be done and how we can reach the broadest possible audience with the right formats in an easy and open way. The answer to that is the Accelerated Mobile Pages Initiative. The acronym is key, right? The first point is the acceleration. So the first thing, the first element of fruition of content on smartphones is speed. We have data, or there's data in the industry that 40% of people actually abandon the navigation if a page takes more than 3 seconds to load. So speed is paramount. There's additional data that shows that conversion rates on, for example, e-commerce sites drop by 30% for every single second of wait that you add to the upload of the page. So speed is really paramount and is a fantastic enabler for everything that comes afterwards. Whatever business model is made better, is improved, is made easier by speed. So acceleration and speed were really at the heart of what we're trying to do here. The fact that the traffic comes through smartphones and mobile devices